This is David Marler, UFO researcher, and you're listening to That UFO Podcast.
I'd like to thank Soundstripe for sponsoring this episode. When I first started the podcast, I cringed listening back and hearing the techno version of the X-Files music that I used to use. Yes, that actually did happen, but as a new podcaster, I didn't really know what I was doing. It's a lot to take in. How do I make sure I don't infringe on copyright? Where do I get good quality tracks? There are a lot of questions. That's why you should take some of the hassle out of your creating, whether it's podcasts, YouTube, TikTok, or Twitch streaming, and use Soundstripe. Soundstripe has a huge library of over 8,000 songs composed by Grammy award-winning artists. All the music is royalty free, so you don't need to worry about copyright claims against your channel. There's a plan for everyone starting from only $9.99 a month. So check out Soundstripe today. Use my special link zen.ai/UFO sound to access unlimited royalty-free music for your content, and be sure to use my promo code podcast at checkout to save 10% off any subscription plan. Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. It's Andy here with your November preview. It's my chance to speak to you, the listeners who might not be on social media or don't see all the posts, and tell you what's coming up this month on the podcast. That gives you a chance to also get involved, get in touch, and also speak to some of those guests as well. First up, thank you everyone for listening, subscribing, interacting and supporting in October. It was a huge month for the podcast. There was big name after big name, and I know there are listeners who have just come on board from some of the emails and DMs I've received recently. So hello if you are new to the pod, and same to those who have been around a little bit longer. Some of you still from the very start of the podcast now, some 2.5 years ago. So wow. This is a good place to also remind folks that this month's listener call-in is open for slots, so just drop me a message on any social media platform, or ideally if you can email me, ufoUAPAM@gmail.com. That is also in the description to the show, and I'll get something arranged with you. I've got a few listeners who don't want to call in either, but they've sent me over their stories to read out, or they've also sent me a voice note. So if you want to record a voice note on your phone, then email me it. That's absolutely fine. I can play that. It can be a question, it could be an opinion, it could be a story, it can be anything you want, obviously UFO phenomenon related. Send it over and I'll get it on the show. Also, again, a few folks have asked me, and I know I've maybe mentioned this in the past, so sorry for repeating myself. If you're a listener who wants to sign up and support me or the podcast through Spotify, you have to go onto Spotify and type That UFO Podcast Premium. That'll show you a separate feed that you sign up to, which is around £2 a month, $3 a month, but you get early access to shows and there's no ads in there either. It's my bad that I called it That UFO Podcast Premium, and some folks have been confused that you have a Spotify Premium, and when they have Spotify Premium they still hear ads and stuff. I know, but if you search That UFO Podcast Premium, you'll see the separate feed, and that would be much appreciated if you want to go on and support through there. You can of course still support through Patreon. You can support through Apple if you're on Apple Podcasts. You can click for a 2-week free trial, and again, early access plus bonus content, plus no sponsors or ads on there too, and that really does help out. Again, it's around £2, $2, $3 depending on where you are in the world. And of course, to those on YouTube who sign up for early access, you can also get memberships through there as well. All of that is appreciated. However, if you're just listening to the podcast on the free feed, as 99% of the world does, not the world, I'm not that big-headed to know the whole world listens, that would be great, you know, but if you listen, just thank you very much for doing so. Let's get into the guests now for the coming month. First up is Mitch Horowitz. Now, Mitch has just appeared at the conference hosted by James and Jay. That's James Iandoli and J. Christopher King in New York City, that featured Gary Nolan and others. This will be next week's release on Monday the 7th of November. It'll be out before that on early access platforms, as always, a few days earlier. So I still have time. If you're listening to this before the 4th of November, you can get your questions over to me for Mitch. He's got a fantastic background in writing, including the esoteric and occult, among other things as well. We'll look at his recent talk at the event entitled Anomalous Experiences and the Crisis of Skepticism. So based on some of the articles that have dropped recently and caused a bit of a stir online, I think this one is really well timed. It's sure to be a good one, and Mitch is a fantastic speaker. After that, I am delighted to finally have Ademar Jose Javard, or AJ Javard, coming onto the podcast. Now, I've been working on this one for a while, folks, in the background. He is a researcher and journalist, and fellow researcher and journalist Ronnie Vernay, who's been on the podcast before, deserves a lot of credit for helping me set this one up. AJ is one of the preeminent UFO researchers from Brazil, and among many other things, we'll be discussing the Virginia case and the fallout it's caused. Maybe by then we'll hear some more about the reported video that's floating about in the wild, with the 35-37 second video that's meant to be out there. James Fox is trying to get his hands on it to the sum of $200,000, and I think he's making some progress there from what we hear. If anyone was going to know more about this case and what's happened since, AJ would be one of those individuals, and maybe he's also one of those who saw the video for himself. So if you've got any questions about Virginia or any other case, especially with that Brazilian flavour to it, let us know and I'll get those put to AJ. A really fascinating mind, and I've not heard him do too many interviews either, so this should be a good one. After that, the popular Grant Cameron makes his return to the podcast. With Grant, I'll be discussing his new book, UFO Sky Pilots, which he touched on our last interview, in which he speaks to names, some familiar, like John Ramirez, who claimed to have piloted or flown a UFO. Fascinating stuff, and an incredible what if, especially for someone like myself. When I read that, I'm like, that's quite the claim to make. But Grant's a great guy, very credible, and he's put it down in a wonderful format as well. I'm still working my way through the early stages of the book, and I'll be finished it before I speak to Grant. I suggest you pick up a copy, but if not, I'm sure the conversation to listen to first will be fascinating. We're obviously by that point going to touch on the UAP Task Force report, which, as you know by now, has been delayed. Its public unclassified release was due on the 31st of October. As I record this, it's the evening in the UK of the 3rd of November. It was meant to be submitted to Congress by the 31st, hasn't happened, and I'm seeing rumours online. You all see the anonymous sources, etc, etc. Folks, when it's out, it's out. There's no point in anyone saying, they've heard. It's just not out yet. And when it's out, you'll hear it, because everyone and their dog is chasing up online and refreshing those links. It could be Friday the 4th of November. It could be Monday the 7th of November. It could be later. There's no point in guessing. You won't win a prize for saying, I was right. So when it drops, I'll be there with a breaking news pod. Dan should be on with me for that, giving you some of the highlights too, because I know Dan is wearing out his mouse button or trackpad, refreshing that link over and over again. So yeah, as soon as those are available, we'll go through the highlights with you online. And then the month finishes very strong with Leslie Kean, award-winning New York Times journalist and author, discussing her past work on the afterlife, her Netflix specials, UFOs, and a lot more. This is sure to be a popular one, so get your questions over early. Again, it's ufoUAPAM@gmail.com. Put Leslie Kean or Leslie in the subject. That would really help me out in finding those questions too, because I do get a lot of emails into that folder, so that would be good. And again, to speak to Leslie about that recent New York Times article that she didn't pen, which I know she shared a little bit of an opinion on as well. So that'll be interesting to find out, how that looks from her side of things, how the New York Times have released a piece which many have seen as a bit of a hit on the UFO subject and its credibility. So really good timing for that one too, folks. And of course, Leslie will be appearing at James Iandoli and J. Christopher King's upcoming conference on the 3rd of December, which is headlined as well by Christopher Mellon. If you can't attend that in the greater New York area, I suggest you buy an online ticket, because that is one that is surely not to be missed. If I had the cash and my wife would let me go at Christmas time, I would have loved to have headed over for that one as well. Listen, my wife actually said I could go, but it's just too close to Christmas, folks, with the family and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that'll be one I'll be watching online for sure. As well as this, look out for some breakdowns during the month, now containing short form interviews or updates. So if you're used to the news updates, I want to get those done regular. I know sometimes it goes a few weeks without one, if there are maybe a little bit less news, but what I've got is some interviews in the can which are shorter form, including interviews with the guys from Estimate of the Situation, the graphic novel exploring the history of the UFO subject. If you're on early access, you'll have heard that one already, because I released that on its own. It's about 25 minutes, half an hour long, and that was a great conversation. I've also got an update on Project Titan from Paolo Gizzardi. Paolo's been a guest on the podcast before, and he's got an update for us on that and what's happening over at San Marino. Little interviews like that now are going to go into the breakdowns at the end, just so you can kind of still hear updates. And if you're on the early access, so when you've signed up to support and that $1, $2, $3, whatever it might be, a couple of pounds, there's lots of currencies, I can't name them all, then you get access to those a little bit early as well, folks, just as a big thank you. So if you're on the breakdowns, you'll hear at the end of those shorter form interviews dropping in as well. So yeah, looking forward to that, and I've got plenty more of those planned for this month as well. Remember, folks, just as a thank you for signing up as well, you get access to the Discord channel. Drop me a message for the link. It's a great community on there, pretty much self-moderated, as folks will debate and discuss without being over the top, and it's a really nice change of pace sometimes from other social media platforms, which can be a bit hectic. It's also a place where you don't need a blue tick, folks. So yeah, there we go. Look out for the breaking news pod, folks, as soon as that report drops. If it happens tomorrow evening, Friday, the 4th of November, I'll get that done ASAP. Otherwise, look forward to dropping the Mitch Horowitz interview next. And thank you once again for listening. It's always appreciated, and I will speak to you soon.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.
Did you know that podcast advertising is way more effective than display advertising, with 67% of listeners remembering brands and 63% making a purchase after hearing them? Whether you want to diversify your ad spend, add a new marketing stream, or test out podcast ads, Zencastr's creator network makes it easy for brands to connect with podcasters. Zencastr's mission is to make podcast advertisements as easy and accessible to business owners as Google or Facebook. Host-read ads like this are the most effective form of podcast advertising. Zencastr works with podcasters to help create unique to them ad spots that create brand awareness and conversion. Zencastr's creator network is the perfect place for you to get into podcast ads and sponsor your favourite creators like me. I've worked with Zencastr now for some time, and they truly put the content creators and the listeners at the heart of what they do. As a huge fan of podcasts myself, and I really mean that, I love podcasts, I often buy products or services that I find useful to me based on those pods that I'm listening to. It supports them, and there's usually a good discount to go along with it. So if you're interested in sponsoring this show or another podcast with adverts for your business, go to zen.ai /that UFO pod 1, that's the number 1, or click the link in the description and fill out the contact information so Zencastr can help you bring your business story to life.